I, I, I am truly speechless. Well, I gotta say, what was this movie? Who was this movie made for? No, seriously, who was this movie made for? Because it certainly wasn't made for me. But, anyways, guys, this is Cole. Today I'm doing an epic rant on, in my opinion, what is one of the worst movies I've ever seen personally. Now, I know some people did like this movie. I know that there are some people who like this movie. And hey, if you guys like this movie, that is completely fine. I respect your opinion. But me personally, for various reasons I'm going to discuss, I really did not like this movie at all. But so, Withering Heights or Wuthering Heights, whatever. It's spelled with W-U, so I'm just gonna call it Wuthering Heights, whatever, which I think is a dumb title. But now, this is based on a book from 1848 and 1847. I believe that's when the book came out, and it's this classic book that apparently there have been many, movie and play adaptations of. And as a point of reference, no, I have not yet read the book, and no, I have not read the book, and no, I have not seen any of the previous iterations. So whether this movie is accurate to the book or not, I cannot say. So I'm going into this as a movie on its own terms. And as someone who never read the book or saw any of the previous iterations, I absolutely hated this movie. But basically, the premise to this movie is where basically the plot says from Warner Bros. Pictures, an award-winning filmmaker, Emerald Fennell, comes Wuthering Heights, a romance time period piece movie starring Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi. So that's basically the plot to this movie. And now this movie stars now this movie has a big cast. You got Margot Robbie, you got Jacob Elordi, you got Han Cho, you got Shaz Lasdiff, you got Allison Oliver, Martin Clunes, and Ewan Mitchell. And this movie was directed by a guy named Emerald Fennell, who before this directed a movie called Saltburn from 2023, which I have not seen that movie, but honestly, I don't care, because Saltburn, I heard, was a long movie, and, well, it was over 2 hours, but, considering that it's from the director of this, I gotta say, if that movie is anything like this, then I don't want to watch it. But and this movie was also produced by other people. It was produced by Margot Robbie was an executive producer on this movie, and this was based on a book written by a woman named Emily Bronte, who I'm not familiar with as an author, but again, I thought this movie was terrible. So let's just get into the rant so I don't have to talk about it longer. So, if anyone actually cares, the movie starts off in the 18th century in England, and this movie literally starts our movie literally starts with a person being hung, and instead of just focusing on the person being hung, guess what? For whatever stupid reason, our first scene of the movie is a person hanging, and it cuts from that right to the person's dick. I'm not joking. Our movie literally starts with a close-up of the person's dick as the person's being hung. I'm sorry, I do not need to see that in a movie. Now look, yes, I understand I understand when people, for example, I understand when people die, they crap themselves. I understand that, but just because that happens, just because that happens, that does not mean I want to see it in a movie, you know. I can't even talk. This movie is so bad. What I'm trying to say is I understand people crap themselves when they die, but that does not mean I want to see it in a movie. The same applies to a guy being hung. I don't need to see a close-up of the guy's dick, okay? I don't need to see that. And we're introduced to our main character of the movie, Kathy, I believe that's her name, who granted, this is from when she's younger, because this movie takes place in the early 18th century, in the late 18th century at the beginning, and then there's a time jump to the 19th century. But I'll get to that. We're introduced to our young protagonist of the movie, Kathy, who is this young girl, and she basically finds this guy attractive. This guy now. The thing is that she doesn't exactly know the name of this character because she says apparently he can't speak, so I'm gonna give him the name Heathcliff because Heathcliff, spoilers for those who haven't seen this movie, not that anyone cares, Heathcliff just so happens to be her brother who abandoned her a long time ago. And I'm like, I'm sorry, look, I understand that now. I've heard that that's the name of the character in the book, but honestly, like, I can't help it. Like, whenever I hear the name Heathcliff, I think of that really fat cat from Garfield called Heathcliff. Like, I'm sorry, but when I hear that name, I can't help it. I just think of that fat cat from Garfield, which is actually funny. Unlike this, because this movie was absolute garbage, and these main characters are so unlikable that I honestly did not care what happened to them at all. I really didn't. Like, for example, early on in the movie, like, the boy who is friends with Margot Robbie's character, the guy, like, he plays such an unlikable jerk that I do not care what happens to him. And here's the thing that sucks. I like Margot Robbie as an actress. I think that she's a good actress, but I thought that her character was so unlikable in this movie. In fact, and I also hate her father in this movie too. Now I forget the name of the actor who played her father in this movie, and the actor, I think he tries the best with the material he's given, but the father is just so unlikable. He is basically a drunk jerk. He's basically a guy who's drunk all the time, and he treats his daughter like absolute garbage, and the whole family. Like, for example, early on in the movie, our two main characters are basically late because the girl wanted to do something and the father is upset that they're both late, and basically the boy lies for her, the boy that she's engaged with, and I use that term very loosely, basically says, oh, it's my fault we were late. So the father then decides to, but then when he says that, the daughter is basically trembling, and the father basically yells, what, you dare to tremble at me? I will give you something to tremble about. And then he decides to beat up this guy. And again, the father, like, that's my main problem with this movie. Not a single character is likable. Not one single character is likable. Not only are our two lead characters unlikable, but everyone else in this movie is unlikable. And if there's no one for me to root for, then you know that you have a terrible movie on your hands. But anyways, cutting to the part, remember how I said there was a time gap to the early 19th century? Well, now let's get to that. So, we now cut to the year 1802, where our two main characters, played by Jacob Elordi and Margot Robbie, again, look, I like these two as actors. In fact, Jacob Elordi, he played Frankenstein in the 2025 Frankenstein movie directed by Guillermo del Toro. And for those of you guys who do not know, I absolutely loved the Netflix movie Frankenstein directed by Guillermo del Toro. I thought that that was a fantastic movie, and I thought that Jacob Elordi did a great job as Frankenstein, and that was easily the best adaptation that was easily the best Frankenstein movie adaptation of the Mary Shelley novel, really since the original movie from the 1930s. It was a very well done movie, and the only positive I will give this movie is I think that even though the characters are unlikable, I do think that the performances by Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi are good. In fact, even though I hate the way their characters are in this movie, the acting, I can say, is good. But anyways, let's talk about some of the other stupid stuff I like. Like, for example, there's a really stupid scene where Jacob Elordi's character is in bed and he's basically in bed and stuff like that, and Margot Robbie asks, "Oh, are you out of bed yet?" And he's like, "No." And so he gets out of bed, and like an unlikable jerk, Jacob Elkerdy's character, he basically, Margot Robbie's talking to him about something, and he basically just decides to hang her, he decides to make her sit on top of a tree, and she's wearing this beautiful dress, and he's like, and he was like, "I'm leaving you." And she's like, "Wait a minute." She's like, "Wait a minute, you cannot leave me up here, because if I fall, my dress will rip." And he says, "Well, you'll have to take your dress off then." And then she basically yells at him, "You will regret this once I fall off of here and die," and stuff like that. And basically, I'm not going to say the guy doesn't deserve it because he's a jerk, but later in the movie, she basically decides to put a bunch of eggs in his bed, and he sits down and, leaving a mess on his bed. I mean, the guy's a jerk, so I don't blame him. But again, both of these characters are unlikable, so I really do not care for what happens to any of them. And then Margot Robbie, she decides that, "Oh, I don't like the way my boyfriend's acting, so I'm gonna leave this place." And she decides that she is going to go to someone else's place. She randomly comes across uh this really nice house with some people who own it, and she basically doesn't want anything to do with Jacob Elkerdy's character anymore. And like my main in it now, there's another example, another problem I have with this movie. Like, here's the thing. She made it very now. Jacob Elkerdy's character, he basically receives a note. Not only does he receive a note, but the entire family that Jacob Elkerdy was raised by receives a note, because like I said, this movie takes place in 1802, and you gotta remember, cell phones and, all this technology we have now did not exist back then. So, all you had to go off of was like basically all you had to go off of was like writing letters and delivering them to people. But anyways, they basically get a letter saying that she's at this house and stuff like that. And the dad, even though I don't like him as a character, the dad makes it very abundantly clear that he does not want Jacob Elkerdy going to visit Margot Robbie. But guess what? Like a moron, the guy doesn't listen, and he sneaks into the place, and Margot Robbie sees that he's at the place, and here's the thing, like, just when it seems like they're about to get back together, Margot Robbie decides to be, a jerk to him, and, they're both toxic and jerks to each other. And another problem I have is, like, I also really hate the boyfriend played by Jacob Elkerdy. He is so unlikable in this movie. Like, for example, and he's also a creep. For example, there is a scene where Margot Robbie is basically digging in her cleavage, if you will, which granted, we don't actually get to see it because, the dress covers it up, but the boyfriend, like, she basically does it over a cliff, basically wants to go over a cliff, but her boyfriend stops her, and like an absolute creep, the boyfriend, like, Margot Robbie says that she literally wants nothing to do with him, but the boyfriend, like a creep, like an absolute perverted creep, decides to sniff her hand and kiss it like an absolute perverted creep. So, yeah. And another problem, again, Margot Robbie is a good actress, but I hated her character in this movie. Like, for example, like I said, she doesn't want anything to do with Jacob Elkerdy anymore, but she decides to basically date someone new. And here's the thing. The new guy that she wants to date, here's the thing. The guy who wants to date, the guy, and here's the thing. The new boyfriend that she wants to date, here's the thing. He is so nice. He is so nice towards Margot Robbie. And you know what? He actually treats her with respect. But what does Margot Robbie do? Despite the fact that this new guy she's dating treats her with respect, she decides to be an absolute jerk and treat this guy like crap for no reason whatsoever. So why should I care what happens to her? And there's also a really stupid scene in this movie where basically Margot Robbie is spying on these two people having sex, but like what they do is like for whatever reason the boyfriend like he basically puts the saddle of a horse around the woman's neck and like has sex with her in this very gross, unnecessary sex scene that I really did not care about. And then the movie ends where our main character, played by Margot Robbie, basically is upset at the fact that this new person she met, well, one of the new people is basically gonna marry this basically is upset that this girl that she met is gonna marry someone else and she's not happy about it. So guess what she does? She decides to lock herself in a room and starve herself to death, and she bleeds to death. And Jacob Elkerdy arrives at the end of the movie crying and sad. But you know what? I don't feel bad for anyone because Jacob Elkerdy and Margot Robbie, despite their good performances, play such unlikable, toxic characters that I do not care what happens whatsoever. And I know people said this movie was well directed. I don't think it was. In fact, I think that a lot of the background was so crappy. Like, I thought that the direction was very flat in this movie by the director. Again, I forget the director's name. Okay, I'm looking right now. The director's name is Emerald Fennell. I think that her direction is rather flat with this movie, and again, I don't think it's a well-directed movie because a lot of the backgrounds are just CGI backdrops that do not look good at all. Like, come on, like, there's no excuse for the $85 million budget you had. You're telling me that you could not have gone to a real location to film to at least make the movie look pretty. Like, you couldn't have done that. But yeah, at the end of the day, screw this movie. I really did not like it. This movie, for some reason, made $200 million off an $85 million budget, which I don't know why. Like, my question is, like, why did this movie make so much money? Like, why? And this movie is only 2 hours and 17 minutes, but honestly, this movie is so boring and badly paced that it felt like this movie was 5 hours long. I really hated this movie. So yeah, thank God I did not see this movie in theaters. I just finished watching it about less than 30 minutes ago on HBO Max, but I absolutely despise this movie. I will never watch it again. And on a scale of 1 to 10, I am going to give, and now, like I said, I've never read the book, but from what I've heard, I've not read the book, but I do know this. Many fans of the book hated this movie because apparently this movie doesn't follow the book whatsoever. But yeah, screw this movie. I'm going to give this movie a 1 out of 10. And it is easily the worst movie I've seen this year, that came out this year that I've seen so far. So yeah. Anyways, guys, that was my rant on Wuthering Heights. And we'll see you guys later. Screw this movie. Bye-bye now.